So this is the project we're going to be making in this tutorial from scratch. What's really exciting about this actually is that there's a lot more going on beneath the surface that you can't really tell here that, well, we'll get into it. I want to spoil the surprise. So basically the way that we work in Autograph is that here in the project panel, we import assets and create things called compositions. And compositions are kind of like mini projects inside of our project. And then we create layers, and that's how we work. And then we render things out. When we have something selected in the timeline panel, we could see it typically in the viewer panel here. And we could also get an overview of the major components that are working in that layer and also the properties of that layer. We can twirl the layer open and adjust properties here, or do it from the much easier to access properties section over here on the right-hand side. Now let's go ahead and start from scratch. I'm going to come back over here to my project panel. I'm going to click this button in the upper left to create a composition from scratch. And with the composition selected in the project panel, regardless of what I'm seeing in the viewer panel or in the timeline panel, I have this selected in the project panel, and so I'm seeing the properties of this composition, not the composition, again, that I'm seeing, the one that I have selected. So what I'm going to do is go down to Format, and I'm going to go against everything I believe in, all my cinematic instincts, and I'm going to choose VHD to make a vertical HD composition for social media or whatever. I'm going to change the duration from 30 seconds. I'm just going to click in that field and type 10. We'll keep the frame rate at 24 or change it to 24 if it's not 24. And then I can double click this composition in the project panel to open it. Now it currently has no layers, no content. It's just an empty composition, but we're seeing this here now. I'm going to go ahead and hit the enter key in the project panel, and I'm going to label this intro _vid. So that way, anytime I see this, I know that I'm looking at this, because it's very possible to look at, as we just saw, look at other things that I'm not editing in Autograph. And that can be a very powerful feature, but it also can mess you up if you're not aware. So name things well. Now, this is where I would want to, in the process, import things into my project. I can do that by double clicking in this blank area in the project panel. I could also right click and choose import files, and I can import a certain type of file if I want to. I can also drag and drop from a Finder or Explorer window. And I've gone ahead and done all of that hassle for us. So in the assets, we'll have all of the stuff that we will need throughout this project. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Denver title file, and I could double click this to get it in the viewer, but I'm just going to go ahead and drag denvertitle.png down to my timeline panel. And now we have this object here, this title file. Now with this layer selected in the inspector here, we have the selection overview section. And again, we see the major components. So this is telling us the name of the selected layer. It's also telling us the blend mode, which is the little squares that says normal right here. We can click that and see blend modes. Also the opacity of this current layer. So all of that's accessible right here, as well as the visibility and the 3D-ness of this layer. By default, this layer is 2D, so we'll just leave it like that for the time being. And also within this layer, we have a source that's generating the content of this layer. And again, the source is this image file. This little icon right here represents an image. But what I could also do is click this little area right here, which is actually the area for generators. And I could get other content. I could swap this out with, the Houston title if I wanted to. Well, I'm just going to go back and choose the Denver title and leave that there. But you can swap out the source or generate a new source, such as a constant, which is basically a solid area of colored pixels, just like a area of pixels. And also we can create a circle or have a cloner be the generator here, grid, a whole bunch of stuff. So this square is for generators. This one over here, this little like test tube beaker thing, is the modifier stack. We'll talk a lot about generators and modifiers in the next movie. We'll talk more in detail about what they are and how to use them. But for now, just know that the generators generate stuff, and then the modifiers modify the stuff that's generated by the generators. For example, I want to add the tile modifier here. So I can scroll down all the way to the T's. You can see how many modifiers we got. But I'm just going to go ahead and type TIL here, and then we have this tile modifier. So I'm going to add the tile modifier, and that instantly tiles the layer a bunch of times. We could also increase the space between these little tiles, and I'm going to actually increase with the gutters value. I'm going to increase this, let's say 10 and 30. That looks pretty decent. And then I actually want to go back and adjust the scale of this source layer. So to do that, I can actually click on the main title of the layer here, and I can adjust the scale here in the properties. I could also come over here to the layer, click the disclosure triangle, open it up, and go to transform and adjust that here. Or alternatively, what I could do is press this layer and use the keyboard shortcut S for scale to reveal the scale property here as well. I have kind of gotten into the habit of using this properties panel. I find that it's very handy, but you could do whatever works best for you. There's no right or wrong way. Now you'll notice that for the scale value, we have a value of 1.0. You'll find that most things in Autograph are kind of normalized. Everything works in 32-bit color, and so when you're doing 32-bit color, things go from 0 to 1. That's kind of a standard, and so here you find that as well, 0 to 1 as the scale value. Now I'm going to take the scale down here, drag this down until I get a value that I'm into. Yeah, it looks pretty good. You'll also notice that when you have this arrow selected and a layer selected, that you can get this kind of like transform gizmo. Initially, this thing scared me because it's like a bunch of like hieroglyphics, but it actually makes a lot of sense and is very handy. So these three icons are for scaling the layer, and these three icons are for the position of the layer. Top, bottom, left, and right are for directional changes. And then these corner icons are for uniform changes. So for example, the left side, as you can see here, this kind of like squished icon, I can adjust this horizontally. I'm just going to press Control or Command Z to undo that. I can also horizontally scale this with that icon here at the bottom. And then I could uniform scale it from this corner icon, like so. Now, same thing with position here. If I want to move it just up or just to the right, I can use these arrows, and I could use this like plus move icon to be able to move it wherever I would like in all directions. Again, with this transform gizmo, I had kind of like a romantic comedy experience where at first I was like, I don't know if I like you. And then now we've fallen deeply in love, me and this transform gizmo. By the way, you hold the Alt key and it switches gizmos. So it goes to the rotation and skew gizmo. So I can actually use one of these skew icons on the edges if I'm holding the Alt key and I use one of these skew icons. Or I can rotate using this center icon here. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Oops, let me undo that. So yeah, so then while I'm rotating this, I can hold the Shift key and it will snap to 45-degree increments, which is really handy. I'm just going to take this back to 0. But if you like that, you can actually turn on and off snapping and also change the value of the snap from right here. Now, okay, I'm going to zoom back out here. I could also hold down my middle mouse button to kind of pan around, which I find to be very handy. You can also use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out here. Now I'm going to leave this layer alone for a minute, and I'm going to generate another layer. I could do that by clicking this little plus icon, add layer, but I find that it's way cooler to use the keyboard shortcut Shift Q. Careful you don't press Command Q and quit the whole application. I'm just going to hit Shift Q, and Shift Q will bring up a kind of like quick access pop-up menu, and my generators will be there. So I'm going to generate a gradient. That will not add a gradient to this layer, because this layer already has a source file, that image, this is going to create a brand new layer with its source as the gradient, or the gradient as the source. Here we see another instance of the transform gizmo. Now with this gradient selected here, actually I'm going to go to the top. Actually, if we click the source, we can get the bounds of the gradient, which obviously comes in great handy. And with the gradient selected, I can go to its properties. I'm going to change the type from linear to reflected, because I basically want this to be kind of like one color, go to another color in the center, and go to another color. And I want it to do that for me automatically. I'm also going to go back up to the gradient layer so we get the gizmo. Then I'm going to hold the Alt key for the rotation value. And then I'm going to hold the Shift key to rotate this 90 degrees. I'm going to zoom out to make sure that it's the way I want it. I might move this down a little bit here. Probably just use these arrows. Yeah, there we go. Now I'm going to open up the gradient section in the properties to see the actual gradient stop, the colors that are making this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this white stop, and I'm going to click on this color wheel to blue, and I'm going to go ahead and go in here somewhere. Actually, I have exact values. I'm just going to use 0 for red. I'm going to use 0.4 for green and 0.7 for blue. That's the kind of blue I'm looking for. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter there and then click outside to accept that color. Looking pretty good. Now, what I want to do is actually kind of like stop this gradient. I don't want a smooth blend. Usually you want that, and that's what we have here, which is great. But I want to, in this case, have it be kind of like stepped. And what I could do is take the bands down from 256, which creates smooth gradients. You could increase that if you want that smoother. But I'm actually going to take this down. And as I start taking this down more, actually, if I want more precise measurements, I could hold the Control or Command key. And if I want bigger adjustments, I could hold the Shift key to make this incrementally go faster. So I'm going to hold the Shift key. And then as we start getting down lower here, soon we should, oh, there we go, it goes really quick. I'm going to get down to my bands, and I want about 7 bands so that we have not a smooth value here. We want these kind of like steps. And also I need to go back to the band interpolation and change this from linear to nearest. And now we have this kind of like, you know, posterized look that I was talking about. Okay, now, everything we've done has been pretty simple, but here's where it starts getting fun. I'm going to go and select my gradient layer, and actually we can just go to the source of the layer. No, actually I want this gradient. I'm going to close up the gradient itself, and I actually want the properties of the layer, specifically the position property. Now, again, I could use the keyboard shortcut P to reveal the position property if I want to animate this in the timeline. Again, I'm kind of partial to the properties section, so I'm going to do that. And so we have the position property for, and actually, let me go back to, I'm going to drag the gradient layer underneath the Denver title. I actually want to adjust the Denver title layer. So I'm going to select this, then go to position here. We have the position property, so I can click and drag left and right or up and down and adjust that way. So again, the X value for position and the Y value up and down for position. Now, one thing that's very important to know about Autograph that is huge and will play a huge role in all that we're able to do in Autograph is that the 0, 0 coordinate is in the center. So if I wanted to put this logo, our original logo, in the center, I don't have to guess or calculate or use some other command. I could just take position to 0 and 0, and I know that that is in the dead center of the composition. That is immensely powerful, as we will see as we go throughout this course. Now, another thing that's powerful is this kind of like circle with 2 squares icon. It almost looks like a robot face with 2 eyes. But if we click this, this is indicating how we want the position value displayed. Unified is when we have multiple attributes like X and Y, for example, and we can see that unified. So that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing both of those values at the same time. We could also separate this. So we have X and Y separate, and that allows us to process generators or modifiers on the X and Y dimensions independently, which is really, really cool. Now, one of the things that you don't find very often. And actually, once you have these separated, you got to go back up to this little like kind of hamburger menu in order to adjust these, how this is separated. One of the things you don't do very often with position is make a single property out of it, because then you can't adjust the X and Y independently. But I actually do want that in this case. And that's because I'm going to run a modifier on this position property. Actually, it's not a modifier, it's a generator. I'm going to generate the current time to animate this very, very quickly. So I'll click the little plug icon here, and I'm going to use a current time generator. So again, that's the little like 2 plugs icon, current time generator. That will add the current time generator to this. And you'll see that our selection overview has been updated, which is really handy. So we can see what's going on. I can open up my transform here. You'll notice that modifiers show up as orange text and generators show up as blue text. So I can instantly look at this and see what's going on with my layers, even though nothing's really changed with the layer over here. So with the position selected here, this is the property, and then this is the generator, you can see I have a multiplier. So it's basically going to use the current time to generate the value. So at 0, it'll be 0. At 1 second, it'll be 1. At 2, it'll be 2, and so on and so forth. And the default multiplier is 1. But what I'm going to do is set this to 10. And then it's going to be, at 1 second, the value is going to be 10. At 2 seconds, it's going to be 20, 30, 40, and so on. So I kind of let this go. And you can see that it kind of like slowly drifts up and to the right automatically. And this is why I unified the properties of position so that it would go diagonally, and I could just do that very easily. And actually what I want to do is take this to -10, and that will make it go the opposite direction. And that way, when we have our soccer player here, or football player if you like, it's going to make it feel like they're kind of going fast and upward because the background is going down and to the left. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, if you have some motion graphics experience, how do you adjust the tiling? Because pretty soon we're going to run out of layer size, layer space, right? Well, actually, we don't really need to worry about that in Autograph so much. If I go to this drop-down menu in the bottom left-hand corner, this is actually, if I put my mouse over it, says render settings. So it's the render settings icon, like a monitor with the little wheel in it, the little cog in the middle of it. If I click this icon, you can see that we get the clip to format option. And that's usually checked by default. That's probably what you want most of the time. But if I uncheck this, you can see that we're not clipped to the format. You can see the lines here where the format is, basically where our composition boundaries are. And now we're seeing the tile of both the gradient and the layer. And you can see that it's just infinite. We could go out, and so we don't need to worry about boundaries, setting the size of the layer for the gradient, setting the size of the layer for the tiles. It just scales infinitely. Same thing if we were to make noise, for example, like fractal noise. I'll hold Shift Q and click noise, and now we have this like fractal noise pattern that also scales infinitely by default. So it's very cool. We don't have to worry about running out of runway space, so to speak. So just select that layer, delete it, go back here to clip to format, and actually clip to format because it's a little bit chaotic seeing the infinity of all of these layers. Now, this doesn't really blend in very well with our background. I do want it to kind of like be a more backgroundy thing. So let's change the blend mode. Make sure that the gradient layer is below the Denver title layer. You can, again, click and drag layers to reorder them. I want the Denver title on top of the gradient so we could see both of them, and the titles on top. And I want to change the blend mode to change how they blend together. So to do that, I can click this little like square icon next to the word normal, and we can see all the many blend modes here. Now, these are some pretty complicated formulas here, and there's a lot of these that I'm not familiar with at all. Like disjoint over, conjoint over, grain extract. I have no idea what these are. These are new to me. But what's really cool is that I can run my mouse over them and get previews of them. Without even clicking to apply, I could roll over and see them. And this is kind of one of the things that we'll see a lot throughout Autograph, is that we could just kind of roll our mouse over things and preview them before applying, which is really nifty. Fonts and a bunch of stuff like that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose subtract. I think that works the best in this case. And that's still a little strong for me. So I'm going to click in here where it says subtract and drag to the left. And that's actually our opacity setting. So I'm going to take down the opacity here, something very low. And actually, maybe this is even lower than I want to go. I might click in here and just type 0.05. So we just have a very faint little logo here. And there we go. We're getting there. Well, for the background anyways. Okay, now let's go back up to the assets folder in our project panel. We want to add the Denver sign logo. The Denver sign, drag and drop that into our timeline panel above the Denver sign. And there we have this pretty little horsey logo. And let's go ahead and take the scale down with that selected, take the scale down to maybe 0.6. I think that's what I decided that I liked. Maybe not. Maybe we need to be a little bigger. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, again, I'm going to use this little up arrow, put that into place. There we go. I like that. Now let's animate this. This is going to start getting fun here. I'm going to go ahead and select this here. And here's how we animate stuff. Over here in the properties section or in the timeline panel next to a property, you'll also have this little square icon. This indicates that that property can be animated over time. And if I, again, making sure that my cursor is at the 2-second mark, I'm going to go to the square, click it, and then click this little diamond to set a keyframe for this value at this particular time. And so then I can back up. And we'll just start off screen, maybe a few frames in, like 4 frames or something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the Y value until this is off screen. And then now we have animation. Comes and just drops into place here. Now, I'm going to select this layer. I'm going to press U to reveal the keyframes. I could also press P to reveal position, but U will reveal all keyframes on the current layer. And I'm going to click this first keyframe to select it. Now, when you see these little diamonds, this indicates what is called linear interpolation. In other words, it's just taking this value and dividing it equally over time. And so it animates in this kind of like very stiff mechanical way. Just goes from here to here, even amount of speed. There you go. So let's give this some pizzazz. I'm going to go ahead and click on this little like invisible line. When you put your mouse there, it turns green, so I could resize the window that way. And I'm going to move the horsey so we can kind of frame the horsey. I could also press the letter F. I'll move this off screen. Watch it. If I press the letter F, it centers that for me, which is nice. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. There you go. And I'm going to go over here in the timeline panel. By default, we're looking at this, which is show timeline. That's typically what we want. But then this thing here, the curve editor, this is a very important place where we can make better animation. I'm going to click the show curve editor button to see this. And again, just that same keyboard shortcut says that was F to be able to frame what we're selecting. I can do the same thing in the timeline panel. So I could press F and frame this animation, scales it up for me, and that's really nice. So again, one of my favorite things about Autograph is I could select this keyframe, right click on it, and go to all interpolations. And look at this. For easing out, easing in, I can have all of these presets already made. So I don't have to figure out how to do a bounce, or if I want to do back or I want to overshoot, I don't have to figure out how to do that. I can just use one of these presets, at least as the jumping off point. So I actually want to have this drop down, and I want it to kind of ease out and then quickly drop. So that's like if something's falling, easing out makes the most sense. And I could have this bounce, which is kind of fun, but elastic is even more fun because it kind of like boings a little bit at the end. And I love boing things. I love when things boing. And so I could select that here. And if I hit the spacebar to preview this, you can see that, wait, actually I'm going to press Command left arrow to get back to the beginning and then preview this. And then we have this like bouncing little horsey animation. It comes in there. Isn't that fun? It's going to boink. What's also really cool is if I like that, but I want it to be like even more overdone, I could increase the amplitude in this little keyframe pop-up here. So I can take the amplitude to maybe like 1.5, and then I back up, and then bow. And so we have a little bit more intensity in that bounce, and I love it. I'm going to go ahead and close the graph editor by going back to the timeline editor. I could also use the Alt and mouse wheel to scroll out of the timeline panel. There we go. Or if I want to, move around, I just want to pan, I don't want to zoom, I could use the Command or Control key with the mouse wheel as I'm scrolling around. Very handy. And with this Denver sign layer selected, again, make sure you have this layer selected, not some other layer. But I'm going to go to its properties, open up motion blur, change motion blur settings from disabled to use composition settings. Actually, I didn't do that. So I'll be on a frame here where it's kind of like falling so you can see what's going on here. I'll change this from disabled to use composition settings. And now you can see that we have this built-in motion blur that adds a lot of energy to this as it's bouncing. Yoink. Now there's a fun trick here that I was saving because I want to show you, I wanted to tell you about the interpolation presets first, but I can actually use those interpolation presets all over the place throughout Autograph. So on my gradient, I'm going to go back and I'm going to open up my gradient settings that I previously closed. And if I go to this black stop and select it, you'll see that I actually have a little button over here on the far right side. And I could click that and then go to this broken drop down arrow. And I could actually use the interpolation presets on my gradient stops, which is so cool. Let me actually zoom out of my horsey a little bit so we can see what's going on. Horsey, like I'm a child. You know what I'm saying. My animation, that's what I should say. My motion graphics project. So with this selected, I'll go to my interpolation settings again. And now you can see that we are easing in and out of these colors and changing the way that this gradient falls, which is really cool. And again, just like with blend modes, I can run my mouse over these options to preview them without applying. I think the one that I ended up liking was ease out quadratic. That kind of spreads this blue a little bit, and I kind of like the way that fall off is, and all of that's handled for me because of this gradient interpolation, which is so cool. Okay, now let's bring in our soccer player. We got this soccer player 02. I believe that's the correct one. I'm going to drag and drop that in. Oop, that's not the right one. Select that and hit delete. And let's try soccer player 01. Drag and drop that. Yep, soccer player 01. That's the correct one. I'm going to go ahead and click this bottom left-hand icon again of my little like meet cute thing. And then on the upper right-hand corner with the move. See how handy that is? I love it. I've really been sold on this gizmo. I am super into it. So scale it, get into place. Again, this isn't rocket science. Whatever settings you like, however big and wherever you want to put your soccer player is great. Now I want to change the color of her to make her feel like a little bit more iconic, like a legend, like she's Ellie Wade or something. So what I'm going to do is with this layer selected, I'm going to go to the source over here and again to this little beaker, and I'm going to click this for modifiers. And you can modify stuff in a bunch of different ways with like math, a bunch of different stuff, and any kind of like effect you'll find in this list as well. And when you see this little red giant icon, that indicates that this is a red giant effect. You can see we have all the universe effects and a few others here. Bunch of stuff to choose from if you have red giant installed as well. Now, what I'm actually looking for is Mojo 2. Now, again, this is not the most critical step. If you don't have Red Giant, it's fine. You don't have to do this. So I'm going to choose Mojo, and I'm just going to use the preset War, and because, soccer is like war a little bit. And maybe we'll take the Mojo preset down from 130 to 100 to kind of tone down that effect. But look at this. If I zoom in, you can see that we've got some alpha garbage going on. And it's probably not my fault for the way that I fiddled with these or exported them from Photoshop. But no mind, we can fix this. I'm going to go back to modifiers, and instead of going back to the little test tube to add another modifier, once I have a modifier, I can just click this handy dandy little plus icon to add another modifier. So in this case, I'm going to add a clamp modifier, and it's very, very important that I drag this above Mojo because this is the stacking order. It processes from top to bottom. So if we have the clamp after the Mojo, it's not going to look right. We want to adjust the alpha channel and fix it before Mojo applies its stuff. So with clamp selected, I'm going to enable min value, and I'm going to take the minimum alpha. You can see if we expand this a little bit, we have red, green, blue, and alpha. I'm going to take the minimum alpha to 0.2. And there you go. We got rid of that gunk. Now, I already do have the Denver title image in this already, but I don't want to mess with it. So I'm just going to go to Denver title and Command or Control click Houston title. I want to bring both of these in fresh, and there we go. Now they're on top of each other, so we can't see them. But if we take the eye icon, turn it off, you can see the one right below it. And actually, I'll just leave off the visibility for right now and select Denver title. This is very, very important. Make sure that, well, I guess you don't need to make sure that the Houston title is off, but make sure that the Denver layer is selected. Now, I want to put this logo down here towards the bottom, but we're going to do this in a really powerful way and open up a new world of what Autograph brings to the motion graphics table. What I'm going to do is with, again, making sure that the Denver title layer is selected, I'm going to go to position. And instead of doing things with my little like romantic comedy friend gizmo over here or adjusting these values, I'm going to create a generator, and one that is extremely powerful. We'll go to position and make sure that you're on the right parameter there. Click the little plug icon for generators, not the test tube. We want the plugs here. And I'm going to choose align to composition. And I'm going to select align to composition. And what this will allow me to do is align the Denver logo to the composition, which is actually a lot more powerful than it sounds. So we want to align this horizontally and vertically. And we want this to be on the intermediate left. So we could do left, we could do center, we could do right, or we could do the intermediate. So it's kind of like halfway between the center and the left edge, or halfway between the center and the far right, which is really cool. So I'm going to choose intermediate left. And similar thing with the vertical alignment. I'm going to take this not to the bottom or to the top or to the center, but to the intermediate bottom. So it's almost kind of like a lower third. At least it's kind of like a lower 25%, I guess. And then here we choose the image horiz anchor. We choose which part of the object is going to be used for the anchor. So I could use the left, and so then basically the left edge of this layer will be in the intermediate left, the 25% mark of this composition. I don't want that. I'm just going to choose center, and I like center being the image vertical anchor as well. But here is the magic. I mean, that's a cool trick in and of itself. It's fine. It's great. But here's where the magic happens, folks. Sources in Autograph, in other words, like the composition size, they are flexible. It's made to be responsive so you can change your compositions. In the modern era, we make one composition that goes out to broadcast, and then we make another version of that that goes out to social, and it goes out to this social media and that social media. And so we need to be able to have formats that are scalable and dynamic, and we don't have to redo our formats and our layouts all the time. And Autograph is really built for this purpose. So in the bottom left-hand area of the viewer panel, we actually have sources. By default, we are looking at what our source is, but we can actually change it to one of these other presets. Say, for example, HD. I could change this to HD, and this will crop and adjust. And typically what happens is what we have here. So when we crop this to 1920 by 1080, this is not at all what we want. Our horse is cut off. Things are just like sized weird. But this Denver Horses logo is exactly where we want it. It is at the intermediate left of this composition and the intermediate bottom of this composition. So all of the relative placement based on the size of the composition for this object, because we set it up correctly, it is going to be the same. I could set this up to be like a square thing or whatever, and it doesn't matter. This logo is going to be the intermediate left, intermediate bottom of whatever size comp that I have. And when we go to render this in a minute, we can basically say we want to render this in all these different formats. We could spit them all out at once, and we could use this one composition as the source for all of these different formats. And if we set this up correctly, we know that all of those formats are going to look right. Now, this gets very advanced, very sophisticated. And again, these are just previews. This is not changing what your composition is. This is just giving you a preview of what it would look like if you were to export to this. And again, we didn't set up rules for anything else in our comp, so everything else is kind of like screwy and doesn't look right. But this logo is exactly where we want it to be because we set it up this way. Now, if you want to animate the Houston logo, you can select it and turn it back on. Same thing, super easy. Actually, it's even easier because we could select the Denver logo, go over to the selection overview, find align to composition, select it, you could right click on it, go to edit, choose copy. And so we basically can copy this, go back to Houston title, and then we can go to align to composition again on the position property, and right click on align to composition, choose edit, paste. All of our settings are there. Now it's on top of the other one. So we need to just change, instead of intermediate left, we need to change this to intermediate right. And now we have these two logos, which is fantastic. Now in the final animation, I animated the scale values of the Denver Horses and Houston Eagles and the position value of our soccer player, but we've already looked at how to do that. I also dragged and dropped this versus to our timeline panel and animated this in the same way, scaled it down, moved it here. There we go. Animated it in the same way, so I'm not going to cover that here. But what I do want to cover is how to create text and how to animate text. So what I'm going to do is go over to my timeline panel, make sure that it's highlighted. I'm going to press Shift Q to get my little quick access for generators, and I'm going to generate text. So I'm going to click on text to create it. I get some sample text here. I'm going to double click my text to select it all. And then I can go over here to the text panel that just opened up. And actually, it's still set on Avenir Next Condensed. That's actually the font that I used and I want for this. I'm going to select that. I'm going to make sure that it's left aligned. And in my case, I'm going to make sure that it's bold. And actually, yeah, I pretty much remembered everything. I want it to be 80 pixels. And then here in the leading, I want this to be about 75%. So this works great. So I'm going to double click in this. Again, select all that text. And I'm going to type in all caps, Friday, 8 o'clock Eastern time, because everything's Eastern time. I don't know, it's cooler somehow. And I'm going to click away to accept that. Actually, I'll go back to this little arrow here. And then I'll get my little thing there, my little controller that I love so much, put that text into place. And now I want to animate this text coming on with opacity. So I'm going to go over to my selection overview. And next to this, you can see animators with the little plus icon. So I'm going to click this and say that I want to animate the opacity of my text. And the way that this works is that we have an attribute or a series of attributes. We have a bunch of attributes if we want. And there's a range from the start to the end. And then we choose what area of our text is affected by that transform. So in this range, actually I want to go back to animator, and I'm going to say I want the opacity, everything in that range to be 0. So then I could go to the range, and I have the start at the beginning and the end at the end. So I'm going to take down the end to 0. So start and end are both at 0. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to animate the end of the selection range from the beginning to the end here. And actually, I want to do that the opposite. I want to start out with everything at 100. Oops, 100. And I'll do start at 100. And then I'll animate this going up here from the start. So I'll animate the start from 0 to 100, and you can see how it kind of like animates on. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Yeah, I haven't been animating the rest of this, so I guess it doesn't really matter where we are in time. So I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe for the start value, and then I'll move in time about 1.5 seconds, and then set this to 100. It'll automatically create a keyframe for us, and now we have some text animation. Now this might seem kind of like a boring thing. If you've animated text before, maybe this feels like very simple, but stay with me, folks. There's some cool stuff ahead. Now I'm going to select this text layer. I'm going to press Command or Control D to duplicate this text layer. And I'm just going to move it over anywhere, it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to double click inside my text. Actually, I'm going to select the text tool, go back to this text, select it all, and then I'm going to talk about the location. So let's just say that it's at Price Gouge Arena, and I'll go ahead and back and select my selection tool to accept that change. And then for my Price Gouge Arena text, I want it to be right aligned, and I want it to be on the right side. But here's the thing. I want both of these text layers to be connected. And if I adjust one, I want the other one to follow suit. So I'm going to go back to my original text layer. I'm going to go to position, and I'm going to separate these so we can adjust X and Y independently. I'm going to right click on the X value, and I'm going to copy the X value. Then I'm going to go to this other layer, the Price Gouge Arena thing, and I'm going to also make sure that I can separate these so that I have access to each of them independently. And I'm going to go to the X value, and I'm going to choose paste, but you'll notice that there's all these different ways to paste. And this is another one of those areas where Autograph is very powerful. We can paste shared, which means that the two properties will reference each other, or we could paste linked, where the initial one is kind of like the controller of this one. So I'm going to choose paste linked, and now they have the exact same position, but they're kind of like back to back here because one's left aligned and one's right aligned. So maybe I can turn off the clip to format. No, that doesn't allow me to see the text, but the text goes off the left edge here. Now I'm going to go back to my original text and do the same thing with the Y value. Copy the Y value, go to the new layer, go to the Y, and then paste linked on the other layer. So it's cool. There's a link there. If I go back to my original text and I move it around, you can see that there is a link between the two. I'm just going to undo that. But that's not what I want, because I actually want the other one to be on the right side, but I still want that link. So what I can do is select the new layer, the one that's supposed to be on the right side. I could go to the X value, and I'm going to add a modifier. I'm going to go to the little beaker here to add a modifier, and don't be scared, but I'm going to add a math modifier. And what's kind of cool is this very simple interface. So like, I hate math, I'm scared of it, but this makes it like very easy and simple. So I'm going to change the operation to multiply, and I'm going to multiply this by -1 and hit OK. And look at this. We automatically have this on the other side because of the 0, 0 coordinates being in the center. Remember how I said that that's really cool? Well, this is one of the reasons why that's so cool, is because we can just multiply things by -1 and it's going to flip things. So we have this text that matches. And again, there is this link where if I move the text up, they have the exact same Y values. And then if I move things in, they have kind of like mirroring values because the Price Gouge Arena is multiplied by -1. So if I were to animate this and have it come in, create a motion path, any kind of thing, as far as position goes, they are going to be perfect mirror opposites of each other. So again, Autograph gives us a ton of really dynamic ways to work. And we can see that here, even in this very simple example we have. Now, all that's left is to render this, and here's how this works. I'm going to go to the project panel, go to our intro vid comp, close this up so we could see, right click on it, and I'm going to choose add to render manager. And then that will automatically come here in this render manager tab, the render manager panel. So it's really important. There are 3 different components to the render manager. Each one of these bars is like a different part, a different component of the render settings. So in this first one we click on, we can save a location, and we can click this browse button if we want to change this to a different location. We could also enable override composition name if we want to rename this something different. And then we click on render instance, and this is where we can change the format. So we could go to the source format, or we could go to a custom format, make our own. We can do square or whatever. If we want to render to multiple formats at the same time, we can click this top plus button, and this will create another render instance, and we can change another format. So we can continue to add more and more render instances with more and more files and more settings, all from just this one render. And then this final instance, we choose the actual format itself, what the file format's going to be, what the video options are going to be, the audio options, etc. And then once we're all set with that stuff, then we can click the Start Render button. And that's it. And now you know how to create a dynamic motion graphics project from start to render in Autograph.